somewhere beyond the quiet halls of the hidden library, beyond the rooms where forgotten memories rest, there is a door that opens into a place filled with letters that were never sent, letters carrying quiet gratitude, unfinished goodbyes, unspoken forgiveness, and words that waited patiently for another time. Tonight, Elias discovers the Room of Unsent Letters, where he will learn that not every letter needs to be delivered, and not every unfinished feeling needs an answer. Some things simply need to be understood and gently released. Welcome to Sleep with Stories, and to another peaceful journey inside the hidden library. So settle comfortably beneath your blankets. Allow your breathing to slow. Let the day quietly drift away. And together, let's step inside. If these peaceful journeys have become part of your evenings, your support through liking, subscribing, and sharing helps keep Elias, the hidden library, and these stories reaching more travelers who may need a little peace tonight. Now, the letters are waiting, and the door is already open. The corridor beyond the doorway was quieter than Elias had expected. There were no footsteps, no distant voices, not even the soft turning of pages that usually filled the deeper halls of the hidden library. Only the gentle sound of his own breathing followed him as he walked. The golden light from the doorway slowly faded behind him. Ahead, small lamps rested along the walls. Each one glowed beneath a glass shade, their light warm and steady. Elias walked beneath them, one after another, until the corridor opened into a vast circular room. He stopped. Shelves covered the walls from floor to ceiling, but there were no books upon them. There were envelopes, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, cream-colored envelopes, blue envelopes, small envelopes tied with faded ribbons, large envelopes sealed with old wax. Some rested neatly together. Others stood alone upon little wooden shelves. None carried visible writing. Yet somehow, Elias knew that every one of them belonged to someone. He stepped closer. A small envelope near his shoulder gave a faint golden glow. Then another, and another. Soon, tiny points of light were moving gently across the room, like stars settling among the shelves. Elias looked around quietly. What is this place? His voice seemed almost too loud. The room answered with silence. Then, somewhere beyond the shelves, a single page turned. Elias followed the sound. He found a narrow passage leading deeper into the room. At its end stood a young woman beside a long wooden table. Her dark hair fell softly over her shoulders, and her warm brown eyes carried a quiet, thoughtful kindness. She wore a deep midnight blue dress with delicate silver embroidery that shimmered beneath the lantern light. She was arranging several envelopes into a small wooden box. When Elias approached, she looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled. "You found your way here." Elias glanced toward the shelves. "Who do these belong to?" She placed the final envelope into the box. "People who once had something they wished to say." Elias looked at the nearest shelf. Did they forget? Not always. She closed the wooden box gently. Sometimes people remember perfectly. Elias considered the answer. Then why didn't they send them? She looked toward the countless envelopes surrounding them. Because there are many kinds of silence. Her answer settled softly into the room. Some silence comes from fear, some from uncertainty, some from love, and sometimes silence comes because the right words have not arrived yet. Elias walked slowly beside the table. He noticed something familiar resting near its edge. His blossom lantern, its gentle golden glow, seemed slightly brighter than before. The young woman noticed his gaze. Some things are remembered by the library long before we understand why. Elias looked back at the shelves. Are we supposed to open them? She smiled gently. No. Then what happens to them? They wait. For what? She looked toward the quiet ceiling. For the moment when waiting is no longer necessary. Elias remained beside the table for a little while longer. The room seemed to grow quieter around him. He could hear the faint rustling of paper, the soft movement of air between the shelves, and somewhere far above, the gentle ticking of a clock. He looked toward the nearest envelopes. Some were sealed with wax. Some were tied with thin silver thread. One was folded so carefully that its edges had become soft with age. Another was no larger than his palm. A third rested inside a small wooden frame. None of them carried a name. None carried a destination. Yet each seemed to possess its own quiet presence. Elias reached toward one of the envelopes, then stopped. Seraphine watched him without saying anything. He lowered his hand. Perhaps they are meant to remain private. She nodded. That is why the library keeps them. Elias looked around again. So no one ever reads them. Not unless they belong to them. The answer was simple and somehow comforting. Elias had spent much of his journey discovering hidden places. He had followed mysterious paths, listened to forgotten melodies, crossed quiet waters, and entered rooms that seemed to remember things long after everyone else had forgotten. But this room felt different. Nothing here was asking to be discovered. Nothing was demanding an answer. Everything was simply waiting. He walked slowly toward the center of the room. There, beneath a round glass ceiling, stood a single empty chair. Beside it was a small wooden table, and upon that table rested one unopened envelope. Elias stopped. The blossom lantern beside him gave a soft, warm glow. He looked at the envelope, then at Seraphine. She did not move. She only said, "Some letters wait for years." Elias waited quietly. "And some," she continued, "wait until the person who needs to read them is finally ready." The room became still again. Elias looked once more at the unopened envelope. For reasons he could not explain, he felt that the Room of Unsent Letters had not brought him here by accident. Elias did not touch the envelope. Instead, he pulled the empty chair away from the table and sat down. For a while, nothing happened. The lamps continued to glow. The shelves remained still. The countless envelopes rested quietly in their places. Then Elias noticed something. A small envelope on the opposite side of the room had begun to glow. Its light was faint at first, then a little brighter. A second envelope answered from another shelf, then a third. Soon, a gentle trail of golden lights appeared between the shelves. They moved slowly, one after another, until they reached the far end of the room. Elias stood. Seraphine watched the lights disappear beyond an arched doorway. "What are they doing?" "They are finding their way home." Elias looked at her. "Home." She nodded. "Every letter remembers the place it was meant to reach. But if it was never sent, that does not mean it was forgotten." Elias followed the fading lights. The arched doorway opened into a smaller chamber. There were no shelves here, only quiet wooden tables, soft cushions, and hundreds of tiny lanterns hanging from the ceiling. Each lantern contained a folded piece of paper. Some glowed warmly. Others were almost completely dark. Elias walked beneath them. He noticed that the brightest lanterns were not the newest. Some had clearly been waiting for many years. Why do some shine brighter than others? Seraphine stood beside him. Because some feelings become clearer with time. Elias looked upward, and the darker ones. She smiled gently. They are still waiting. Elias watched one small lantern sway above him. He did not ask what was written inside. For once, he felt no need to know. He simply stood beneath its quiet light and allowed it to glow. Elias remained beneath the lanterns for a little while. Their soft light moved gently across the room, like reflections upon still water. Then he noticed something unusual. One of the lanterns had no paper inside. It was completely empty, yet it was glowing brighter than all the others. Elias looked at it carefully. That one. Seraphine followed his gaze. Yes, Why is it empty?" She smiled, because not every feeling needs to become a letter. Elias looked back at the lantern. Its light was warm, quiet, and strangely familiar. He thought of all the places he had visited, the people he had met, the kindness he had received, the things he had learned, and the moments he had carried quietly from one journey into the next. Perhaps some memories were not meant to be written down. Perhaps some gratitude could remain simply gratitude. Some goodbyes could remain gentle. Some hopes could remain unwritten without becoming incomplete. The empty lantern continued to glow. Elias smiled softly. For the first time since entering the room, he understood why the place felt so peaceful. It was not filled with things that had been forgotten. It was filled with things that had been given permission to rest. Seraphine walked toward the doorway. "Elias," he turned. "There is something else you should see." She opened a narrow wooden door at the far end of the chamber. Beyond it was a quiet garden, washed in silver moonlight, and along the garden path, 7 empty stone seats rested beneath the trees. Elias looked at them for a long moment. Something about them felt familiar, not because he had seen them before, but because somewhere deep within the library, he already knew they had been waiting. The garden beyond the doorway seemed to belong to another part of the night. The air was cooler there and carried the faint fragrance of white flowers. Elias stepped onto the stone path. Behind him, the warm lantern light of the chamber remained visible through the open doorway. Seraphine followed quietly. Neither spoke. They simply walked beneath the trees. The 7 stone seats stood ahead, one after another, each facing the center of the garden. Elias approached the first. The stone was smooth beneath his fingertips. A faint warmth passed through it. He looked toward Seraphine. Did these belong to someone? She shook her head. Not yet. He looked at the remaining seats. Then why are they here? Because the library sometimes prepares a place before the traveler arrives. Elias smiled softly. He understood that answer. The hidden library had always seemed to know what its travelers needed. Sometimes, before they knew themselves, they continued along the path. Beyond the 7th seat stood a small stone fountain. Its water moved silently beneath the moonlight. Beside it grew several young plants with silver-green leaves. Elias stopped. He recognized them. The seeds. Seraphine looked at him. "You remember them?" "I remember waiting for them to grow." She smiled. "Some things grow quietly." Elias knelt beside the plants. Tiny golden points of light rested between their leaves. Not flowers, not yet. Only the promise of them. He touched one leaf gently. Are these connected to the letters? Seraphine looked toward the garden. Perhaps. Elias glanced at her. She continued softly. Some things written in the library are never meant to remain on paper. A gentle breeze moved through the garden. The silver leaves trembled. One tiny golden point of light rose from beneath the earth and disappeared into the night. Elias watched until it was gone. Then he looked toward the 7 empty seats. For the first time, he wondered whether the garden was waiting for letters or for the people who had written them. Elias remained beside the plants for a little while. The garden had become almost completely still. Only the fountain continued its silent movement beneath the moon. Seraphine walked toward the first stone seat. She brushed a few fallen petals from its surface. There is something different about these seats, Elias said. Seraphine looked at him. What do you mean? They feel. He searched for the right word. Unfinished. She smiled gently. Perhaps they are. Elias walked toward the second seat, then the third. Each one carried the same quiet warmth. None felt abandoned. None felt forgotten. They simply seemed to be waiting for something that had not yet arrived. At the 7th seat, Elias stopped. A small silver mark had been carved into the stone. He recognized its shape. It resembled the folded corner of an envelope. He looked at Seraphine. Was this here before? She shook her head. I don't know. Elias touched the mark. The blossom lantern at his side gave a soft golden pulse. For a moment, the 7 seats seemed connected by thin threads of light beneath the grass. The glow moved from one seat to the next, slowly, peacefully, until it reached the garden fountain. Then it disappeared. Elias lowered his hand. What was that? Seraphine looked toward the fountain. An invitation. To whom? She turned toward him. Perhaps to someone who has been waiting for a place to belong. Elias thought about the unopened letters inside the chamber, then about the empty lantern, then about the 7 seats. The pieces seemed connected, but the picture was not yet complete. He did not feel the need to solve it. Not tonight. Some mysteries within the hidden library were gentler when allowed to unfold in their own time. Seraphine walked toward the far end of the garden. There is one more place. Elias followed. Beyond the fountain, a narrow path disappeared between the silver trees. At its end, a single wooden bench rested beneath a flowering arch. Upon the bench lay one sealed envelope, and unlike all the others, this one carried a name. Elias stopped beside the bench. The envelope rested exactly where the moonlight could reach it. Its paper was pale blue, almost the same color as the quiet sky above the trees. He looked at the name written across it. For a moment, he simply stood there. He knew the name, not because he had met the person, but because the library had once whispered it to him. Seraphine remained a few steps behind. She did not ask what he had seen. Elias reached toward the envelope, then paused. "May I?" Seraphine nodded. "Only if you are the one it belongs to." Elias looked again. The name was not his. He slowly withdrew his hand. The envelope remained untouched. A soft breeze moved through the flowering arch. One white petal landed upon the seal. Elias smiled. Then someone else is still on their way. Seraphine nodded. Perhaps. They stood together beneath the arch. For a little while, neither spoke. Then Elias noticed something beneath the bench. A small wooden drawer had been built into its side. He opened it gently. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. Unlike the sealed envelope, this page was completely blank. Elias lifted it carefully. There was no name, no message, no mark, only a faint golden glow along one edge. He looked at Seraphine. Another letter. She smiled. Not yet. Elias studied the blank page. Then what is it? An empty beginning. He looked toward the moonlit garden. Perhaps the room had not brought him here to read what others had written. Perhaps it had brought him here to understand what remained unwritten. He folded the page once, very carefully, and placed it back inside the drawer. Then he closed it. The garden seemed to grow warmer around them. Somewhere beyond the trees, a single bell chimed. One quiet note. Then silence returned. The bell did not ring again. Its single note seemed to remain suspended above the garden, softening as it traveled between the trees. Elias stood beside the bench and looked once more toward the sealed envelope. He still did not touch it. There was something peaceful about leaving it exactly where it had been placed. Not every unanswered thing needed to become an immediate question. Seraphine stepped beneath the flowering arch. The library has shown you enough for tonight. Elias looked at her. How do you know? Because the garden has gone quiet. He listened. She was right. The fountain had slowed. The silver leaves had stopped moving. Even the tiny lights beneath the plants had disappeared. Only the moon remained above them. Elias smiled. Then perhaps it is time to go. Seraphine nodded. They walked back along the stone path. As they passed the 7 seats, Elias noticed something different. The first seat was no longer empty. A single white flower rested upon it. He stopped. Seraphine looked back. Neither of them spoke. Elias walked closer. The flower was fresh. its petals bright beneath the moonlight. Beside it lay a tiny folded piece of paper. He did not open it. He simply understood. Someone had found their way to the garden. Or perhaps someone was finally ready to begin. Elias looked toward the doorway, leading back into the room of unsent letters. The countless envelopes waited beyond it. The empty lantern waited too, and somewhere among them, a letter with a name upon it was still waiting for its rightful traveler. He touched his blossom lantern gently. Its golden light answered. Then Elias and Seraphine returned toward the doorway, leaving the garden exactly as they had found it. Quiet, patient, and full of beginnings that did not need to be hurried. When Elias stepped back into the room of unsent letters, something had changed. The shelves were exactly where he had left them. The lamps still glowed beneath their glass shades. The thousands of envelopes remained quiet in their places. Yet the room no longer felt completely still. A soft movement passed through the shelves. Not a breeze, not footsteps, paper. One envelope had slipped gently from a shelf. It landed upon the wooden floor without making a sound. Elias walked toward it. Seraphine followed. The envelope was pale green, sealed with a small silver thread. Elias looked at the empty space on the shelf above. Did it fall? Seraphine shook her head. No. The envelope moved, slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one corner pointed toward the center of the room. Elias watched it. Then another envelope slipped from a different shelf. It landed beside the first. Then another soon. A quiet trail of envelopes had formed across the floor. None were opened. None were broken. They simply rested one after another, leading toward the circular chamber where Elias had first seen the empty lantern. He looked at Seraphine. Are they trying to show us something? Or perhaps they followed the trail. At the center of the chamber, the empty lantern was still glowing. But now, there was something beneath it. A small wooden table had appeared. Upon the table rested a shallow silver bowl. Inside it lay dozens of tiny paper boats. Elias stepped closer. Paper boats. Each one had been folded from a different kind of paper. Some were ivory, some were blue, some were covered with delicate golden patterns, and one was folded from a page that Elias recognized immediately. He looked at Seraphine. This came from the garden. She nodded. The library has begun connecting the pieces. Elias carefully lifted the little boat. It was warm, not with heat, but with memory. For a brief moment, he heard something. A child's laughter, a mother's voice, the sound of rain against an old window. Then it faded. Elias placed the boat back into the bowl. He understood. The letters were not simply messages that had never been sent. They were moments, memories, feelings, and words that had continued searching for somewhere to belong. He looked across the room. For the first time, the shelves no longer seemed full of unfinished things. They seemed full of journeys. And perhaps some journeys did not end when a letter remained unopened. Perhaps they simply changed direction. The room seemed to breathe around them. One by one, the paper boats began to move. They drifted gently across the silver bowl, turning slowly beneath the empty lantern. Elias watched in silence. Each little boat carried something different: a memory, a kindness, a farewell, a hope that had once been too difficult to speak. He looked toward Seraphine. Where do they go? She touched the edge of the silver bowl. Wherever they are needed. Elias watched another boat turn toward the edge. But who decides? Sometimes, she said softly, the person who made it. The boat stopped. Then its folded paper began to glow. A tiny golden light appeared inside it. Elias smiled. He had seen that kind of light before. It was the same gentle warmth that lived inside the blossom lantern. The boat slowly rose from the bowl. It floated upward, past the empty lantern, and through the glass ceiling above. Elias followed it with his eyes. Beyond the ceiling, the night sky waited. The little light became smaller, then disappeared among the stars. Another boat began to glow, then another soon. The chamber was filled with quiet golden lights. Elias stood beneath them, watching memories leave the room. For the first time, he understood something the library had been trying to teach him. Holding something forever was not always the same as honoring it. Sometimes, the kindest thing we could do was let it continue its journey. Elias watched until the last paper boat disappeared into the night. Then he noticed something. The silver bowl was no longer full. A narrow passage had appeared behind it. He had not seen it before. The walls on either side were covered with tall wooden panels, each carved with delicate patterns of waves, stars, flowers, and winding paths. Seraphine walked toward the opening. Elias followed. The passage curved gently downward. With every step, the sounds of the library grew softer behind them. At the end of the passage was a circular room. Unlike the Room of Unsent Letters, this place contained no shelves. Instead, hundreds of small wooden drawers covered the walls. Each drawer had a tiny brass handle. Some were open, most were closed. Elias approached the nearest one. Inside was a single folded paper boat. He looked at Seraphine. More boats. These have already traveled. Elias carefully lifted it. The paper felt almost weightless. Then why are they here? Seraphine looked around the room. Because a journey can leave something behind. Elias placed the boat back inside. He noticed that every open drawer contained something different. A pressed flower, a small feather, a ribbon, a dried leaf, a tiny silver bell, objects that seemed ordinary until he looked at them more closely. Each carried the same faint golden glow. He walked farther along the wall. One drawer contained a small wooden key. Another held a child's blue button. Another contained a smooth white stone. Elias smiled softly. These belonged to people, yes, and the library kept them. Only the things that were willingly left behind. Elias looked at the objects again. Nothing here seemed lost. Everything had been placed carefully, as though each object had been given permission to rest. Then he noticed something unusual. At the very end of the room stood one tall drawer. It was larger than the others. Its brass handle was shaped like a crescent moon, and beneath it there was a small inscription. Elias leaned closer. He could not read the words. They were written in a language older than any he had encountered within the library. Seraphine stood beside him. What does it say? She looked at the inscription for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Not everything that is left behind is meant to be forgotten." Elias rested his hand upon the crescent handle. The drawer opened by itself. Inside, there was no object, only a single narrow path of golden light leading downward. Elias looked into the darkness beyond it. For the first time that night, the library seemed to be inviting him somewhere neither of them had expected to go. Elias stepped closer to the golden path. It disappeared beneath the floor, but there was no staircase. Only light, soft, steady, and warm enough to make the darkness feel welcoming. Seraphine stood beside him. "Have you been here before?" "No." She looked toward the passage. "Neither have I." Elias smiled. That answer made the place feel even more extraordinary. Together, they stepped forward. The moment Elias placed one foot onto the golden light, the floor beneath him appeared. A narrow stone walkway formed beneath each step, then disappeared again behind them. They were descending, not quickly, not toward darkness, but into a deeper part of the library. The walls slowly changed around them. Wood became stone, stone became glass, and behind the glass, Elias began to see water. A vast underground river flowed silently beside the passage. Its surface reflected hundreds of tiny lights. Some looked like stars, Others looked like distant lanterns. Paper boats drifted upon the water. Elias stopped. Those aren't the same boats. Seraphine looked toward the river. No, these boats were older. Their paper had softened with time. Some carried flowers. Some carried small folded ribbons. Some carried nothing at all. Yet every one of them moved peacefully with the current. The walkway continued beside the river. Elias followed it. As they walked, small doorways appeared in the glass walls. Behind one was a quiet reading room. Behind another, a room filled with sleeping plants. Farther ahead, he saw a circular observatory beneath a ceiling of moving stars. The hidden library seemed to extend endlessly beneath itself. Every room connected to another. Every path revealed another forgotten corner. Elias slowed his steps. He wanted to remember everything. But then he noticed something floating toward them on the river. A single paper boat, brighter than all the others. It moved against the current, straight toward Elias. Seraphine watched it approach. The boat stopped beside the walkway. Its folded sides opened slowly. Inside rested a tiny golden key. Elias looked at it. He knew that key, not from another room, but from another journey. His fingers closed gently around it. The golden light beneath his feet brightened, and somewhere ahead, a door unlocked. The door opened without a sound. Beyond it, there was no room. There was a sky. Elias stood at the threshold, looking into an enormous space filled with drifting clouds and distant stars. The underground river continued beneath the doorway, yet beyond the threshold, its surface seemed to rise into the heavens. For a moment, Elias could not understand what he was seeing. Then he noticed the boats, hundreds of them. They floated through the open sky as though the clouds were water. Some moved slowly between the stars. Others rested upon enormous silver clouds that drifted beneath a pale moon. Seraphine stepped beside him. The library has many ways of keeping a memory. Elias looked at her, and this is one of them. She nodded. This is where the journeys that have been released continue. He stepped through the doorway. The air felt cool against his face. Below him, there was no ground, only clouds. Yet beneath his feet appeared a narrow path of pale golden light. He took another step. The path formed again. Seraphine followed. Together they walked into the sky. Far ahead, a cluster of lanterns drifted around a distant tower. Its windows glowed warmly. Elias watched the lanterns moving around it. Is someone living there? Someone has been waiting there for a very long time. He looked at her. Who? Seraphine smiled. is what we are going to discover. They continued across the clouds. As they walked, small paper boats passed around them. Some carried flowers. Some carried tiny lights. One carried a folded ribbon that Elias recognized. He reached toward it, but the boat drifted gently away. He smiled. Perhaps it had another destination. Ahead, the tower grew larger. Its highest window opened toward the stars, and from somewhere inside came the soft sound of music. The music grew a little clearer as they approached the tower. It was not a melody Elias recognized, yet something about it felt familiar. The notes moved slowly through the open sky, soft as a distant memory. They passed through an archway of silver stone. Beyond it was a circular terrace, surrounded by low glass walls. Hundreds of paper boats rested upon the clouds below. Some were completely still. Others drifted gently toward the tower, following paths of golden light. At the center of the terrace stood a long wooden table. Upon it were dozens of small objects: a pressed flower, a blue ribbon, a silver key, a child's wooden toy, a smooth white stone. Elias stopped. He recognized the objects. They were the things he had seen inside the hidden drawers below the library. They came here. Seraphine nodded. After they were left behind, Elias looked across the table. Then this is where their journeys continue. Yes. He moved slowly from one object to another. Each seemed to hold a quiet warmth, not a memory that demanded to be remembered, but one that was content simply to exist. Then Elias noticed an empty space near the end of the table. A small brass plate rested there. Beside it, a single white flower. He looked toward Seraphine. Something is missing. She nodded. Something has not arrived yet. Elias looked toward the tower. The music continued above them, softly, patiently, as though someone inside already knew they were coming. He walked toward the entrance. The great wooden doors opened before he touched them. Warm golden light spilled across the terrace. Inside, the music stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a voice spoke from somewhere beyond the doorway. "Come in, Elias." He looked at Seraphine. She smiled. Together, they stepped inside. The voice did not return. Elias remained near the doorway, listening to the quiet that followed. Then he noticed a narrow staircase along the far wall. It curved upward through the tower, disappearing into soft golden light. Seraphine looked toward it. The music came from there. Elias began climbing. Each step was made from pale wood, smooth from years of use. Along the walls hung small glass cases. Inside, each one rested a different object: a ribbon, a flower, a letter, a tiny lantern. A photograph faded almost completely to silver. Elias slowed beside each case. None of them carried names, yet each object seemed to belong somewhere. Halfway up the staircase, he heard the music again. One quiet note, then another. The sound came from above. They continued. The staircase opened into a circular room beneath the highest roof of the tower. A large window stood open toward the stars. In the center of the room, an old piano rested beneath the moonlight. Its ivory keys were moving by themselves. No one sat before it. The melody was gentle, almost like a lullaby. Elias stood completely still. The piano played one final note and stopped. On the music stand rested a single sheet of blank paper. Elias approached it. As he reached the piano, golden letters slowly appeared across the page. Not a name, not a message, only one sentence. Elias read it quietly. Some memories return when we are finally ready to receive them. He looked toward Seraphine. She had become very still. For the first time, she seemed surprised. Elias turned back toward the piano. A small compartment had opened beneath the keyboard. Inside, something was glowing. Elias leaned closer. The compartment beneath the piano glowed with the same warm light as the lanterns in the library. Inside rested a small wooden box. It was beautifully simple, smooth at the edges, with a crescent moon carved into its lid. Elias lifted it carefully. The moment his fingers touched the wood, the piano played a single soft chord. He opened the box. Inside was a collection of tiny folded papers. Each one was no larger than his thumb. He looked at Seraphine. "Are these letters?" She shook her head. "Listen." Elias picked up the first paper. He did not unfold it. Instead, he held it gently between his fingers. A voice rose from somewhere within the paper, soft, faint, almost like someone speaking from very far away. "Thank you." The voice disappeared. Elias looked at the next paper. Another voice emerged. "I remember." Then another. "I forgive you." Another. "I was happy." Elias lowered the paper. The words were simple, yet each one seemed to carry an entire lifetime behind it. He looked at the little collection. "What are these?" Seraphine came closer. Things people wished they had said before they were ready to let them go. Elias looked down at the box. There was no sadness in the voices, only peace. He understood then why the piano had brought them here. The tower was not keeping memories alive. It was giving them somewhere gentle to be heard. before they continued onward. Elias placed the paper back inside. Then he noticed one final piece beneath the others. It was different. It was completely blank. He lifted it. The piano began to play again. This time, the melody was warmer, more familiar, and Elias suddenly recognized it. It was the same melody he had heard long ago, inside the hidden library. He looked toward Seraphine. She was watching him carefully. "You know this song," he said. Her expression softened. "Yes." "Where did it come from?" Seraphine looked toward the open window. "From the first traveler who ever learned how to leave something behind." The words remained with Elias for a long moment. The first traveler, someone who had learned how to leave something behind without losing what it meant. Elias looked at the blank paper in his hand. "Did they write this?" Seraphine shook her head. "No." "Then who did?" "The library." Elias looked surprised. "The library can write." Seraphine smiled. "Sometimes it simply remembers." The piano continued its quiet melody. Outside the window, the paper boats drifted slowly across the clouds. One by one, their little lights began to rise. Elias watched them disappear into the stars. Then he looked at the blank paper again. There was still nothing written upon it. Yet somehow, he no longer felt that it was empty. He understood that some things did not need words to become meaningful. A kindness could live in a gesture. A goodbye could live in a memory. And a beginning could exist before anyone knew what it would become. Elias placed the blank paper back inside the wooden box. The piano played its final note. The golden light beneath the keys slowly faded. Seraphine closed the compartment. For a while, they stood together beneath the open window. The tower felt peaceful now, as though it had finished telling them what they had come to hear. Then Elias noticed something beyond the clouds. A distant lantern was rising. It was larger than the others, and its light was brighter. As it climbed into the night, another appeared beside it. Then another soon. A quiet procession of lanterns was crossing the sky. Elias smiled. Where are they going? Seraphine looked upward. Home. He watched the lights until they became stars. And somewhere deep within the tower, the piano began playing again. The lanterns continued rising long after Elias and Seraphine left the balcony. Their lights became smaller until they were almost impossible to distinguish from the stars. Elias remained at the window. He watched the last one disappear. Then something caught his attention below. A narrow bridge had appeared among the clouds. It stretched away from the tower toward a distant island of silver grass. Seraphine came to stand beside him. Was that there before? No. The bridge was made from pale stone and thin golden lines of light. Beyond it, the island seemed to move slowly through the clouds. Elias looked at Seraphine. Where does it lead? She smiled. Somewhere the library does not usually show its travelers. They stepped onto the bridge. With every step, the clouds beneath them opened slightly. Far below, Elias could see the underground river winding through the darkness. Above, the stars seemed close enough to touch. Halfway across the bridge, they heard a soft sound. Not music, not a bell, laughter. Elias stopped. The sound came from the island ahead. They continued. The silver grass grew taller as they approached. Tiny flowers opened beneath their footsteps, then gently closed again after they passed. At the center of the island stood a circular pool. Its surface was perfectly still. No wind disturbed it. No ripple crossed the water. Yet beneath the surface, thousands of tiny lights moved slowly. Elias knelt beside the pool. He looked into the water. Instead of his reflection, he saw a room he remembered. The first room he had ever entered inside the hidden library. He watched himself standing there, younger, uncertain, and completely unaware of how many journeys were waiting ahead. Elias looked away, then back again. The image had changed. Now he saw the tea house between seasons, then the mapmaker's hall, then the valley of silent bells. Each memory appeared for only a moment before becoming another. Seraphine stood quietly beside him. This pool remembers journeys. Elias watched another memory rise beneath the water. All journeys. She shook her head. Only the ones that changed the traveler. Elias looked at her. And why is it showing me these? Seraphine looked across the silver island. Perhaps, she said softly, because you are nearing the end of one. Elias looked back into the pool. The water had become completely still again. Then, one final light appeared beneath its surface. The final light beneath the pool began to rise. Slowly, it reached the surface. Elias leaned closer. The light did not become another memory. Instead, it formed an image of a doorway, a familiar doorway, but this one stood beneath a sky filled with stars. Elias watched as the door opened. Beyond it was a quiet garden, then a river, then a room filled with lanterns. Places he had already visited, places that had once felt separate. Now they appeared connected, like pages belonging to the same book. Seraphine looked into the water. The library is showing you the path behind you. Elias nodded, and the path ahead, the image changed. The doorway disappeared. In its place appeared a long road of silver light stretching toward a distant horizon. At the end of it stood a single golden tree. Its branches reached upward, holding dozens of small glowing objects among its leaves. Elias could not tell what they were. They seemed to change whenever he looked at them. A key, a letter, a lantern, a flower, a folded boat, then something else, something he had never seen before. The image faded. The pool became clear again. Elias remained silent. He understood that the library was not showing him a destination. It was showing him a choice. He looked at Seraphine. "Do I have to follow it?" She smiled. "No." The answer surprised him. "Then why show me?" "Because knowing that a path exists," she said, "is different from being told to take it." Elias looked toward the golden tree that no longer existed beneath the water. For once, he did not feel the need to know what waited there. He simply felt grateful that the path had been shown to him. A gentle breeze moved across the island. The silver grass bent softly, and the flowers opened beneath the moonlight. Elias stood. "Then let's keep walking." Seraphine smiled. Together, they left the pool behind, and somewhere beneath its still water, the final light continued shining. The island seemed quieter after they left the pool. The silver grass swayed gently behind them, while the narrow path carried them toward the far edge of the clouds. Ahead, a small pavilion appeared. Its roof was made of glass. Its walls were open on every side. Inside stood a collection of lanterns, each one different. Some were round, some were long and narrow, some were made from paper. Others seemed to have been woven from threads of moonlight. Elias stepped inside. None of the lanterns were lit. He looked at Seraphine. "Why are they here?" She walked slowly between them. "These are lanterns that were never released." Elias looked at the dark little lights. "Why?" "Because their travelers were not ready." He reached toward one, then stopped. A small brass tag hung beneath it. There was no name, only a single symbol. Elias recognized it immediately. The same crescent moon that had been carved into the wooden box inside the piano tower. He looked around the pavilion. Every lantern carried the same symbol. "This place is connected to the tower." "Yes." "Then why bring me here?" Seraphine looked toward the open sky. "Because some things cannot be released until someone understands what they were carrying." Elias considered the lanterns. He did not touch them. Instead, he walked slowly through the pavilion. At the very center stood one empty hook. Unlike the others, it had no lantern beneath it. Only a small golden thread hung from the ceiling. The thread moved gently in the night air. Elias reached toward it. The moment his fingers touched the thread, one of the dark lanterns behind him began to glow. Then another. Soon, the entire pavilion was filled with soft golden light. Elias turned. For the first time, the lanterns were no longer waiting in darkness. They were ready to be seen. The lanterns continued glowing around them. Their light was gentle, almost like breathing. Elias walked slowly toward the center of the pavilion. The golden thread above the empty hook had become brighter. He looked up. For a moment, he thought he could see tiny images moving inside the thread. A garden, a river, a window, a pair of hands folding a paper boat. Then they disappeared. Elias lowered his eyes. One lantern near him began to sway. Its light grew warmer. A small opening appeared along its side. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Elias carefully removed it. The paper unfolded by itself. There were no words, only a small drawing of a door beneath a moonlit sky. Elias looked at it for a long moment. He recognized the door. It was the same door he had seen beneath the pool, the same path, the same distant golden tree. He looked toward Seraphine. The library keeps showing me the same place. Seraphine nodded. Then perhaps, she said softly, you are meant to remember it. Elias folded the paper again. He placed it back inside the lantern. The light settled. The other lanterns slowly dimmed. Only the one in his hands remained glowing. Then the empty golden thread above them began to move. It stretched gently across the pavilion and pointed toward the far side of the island. Elias followed its direction. Beyond the pavilion, another bridge had appeared. This one was much narrower. It crossed a sea of clouds toward a distant cluster of lights. Elias smiled. The library had not given him an answer. It had given him another place to explore. He stepped toward the bridge. Seraphine followed. Behind them, the lanterns remained glowing softly in the glass pavilion. And ahead, the golden path continued into the night. The bridge waited beneath the moonlight. Elias stepped onto it. The first few steps were made of pale stone, but farther ahead, the stone gradually became transparent. Below them, clouds drifted endlessly through the darkness. Far beneath those clouds, tiny lights moved like distant stars. Elias slowed. For a moment, he felt as though the entire sky were resting beneath his feet. Seraphine walked beside him. Neither spoke. There was no need. The bridge carried them toward the distant lights. As they came closer, Elias began to see what they were. Not lanterns, windows. hundreds of small windows glowing from floating buildings scattered across the clouds. Some belonged to tiny houses, some to little towers. Others appeared to be shops, libraries, and quiet rooms suspended in the open sky. A whole hidden settlement rested above the clouds. Elias smiled. I didn't know this was here. Most travelers don't. They continued forward. A narrow staircase descended from the bridge toward the nearest floating building. At the bottom stood a small wooden sign. There were no words upon it, only a painted paper boat. Elias followed the staircase. The moment his feet touched the cloud below, the windows around him brightened. One by one, doors began opening. Warm golden light spilled into the night. Someone had been waiting for them. Elias looked toward the little houses. For the first time since entering this hidden world, he felt that they were not simply exploring another forgotten place. They had discovered somewhere that was still alive, and somewhere ahead, a new journey was already beginning. The floating settlement was quieter than Elias had expected. There were no crowds, no hurried footsteps, no voices calling from one doorway to another. Instead, each little building seemed to have its own peaceful rhythm. A baker placed warm bread upon a wooden windowsill. A woman watered flowers growing from silver pots. A small library stood beneath a curved glass roof, its windows glowing softly against the night. Farther ahead, a narrow bridge connected two floating gardens. Elias followed it slowly. The flowers here were unfamiliar. Their petals were almost transparent, and tiny points of light moved gently inside them. He reached toward one. The flower opened. A small golden moth emerged, circled his hand once, then disappeared into the darkness. Elias smiled. Seraphine watched it. Even here, she said, the library keeps finding ways to surprise us. They continued through the gardens. At the far end stood a quiet house with a round blue door. Unlike the other buildings, its windows were dark. Elias approached. He noticed a small paper boat resting on the doorstep. Inside it was the same golden thread they had followed from the pavilion. Elias picked it up. The thread immediately began glowing. It stretched from his hand, through the garden, and toward the dark house. He looked at Seraphine. This is where it leads. She nodded. Elias placed his hand against the blue door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened inward. Warm light filled the entrance, and somewhere inside, a familiar voice whispered his name. The voice came again, softly, from somewhere deeper inside the house. Elias stepped across the threshold. The room beyond was small and warm. A fire burned quietly inside a stone hearth. Books rested upon wooden shelves. Several paper boats hung from the ceiling on nearly invisible threads, turning slowly whenever the air moved. Elias looked around. There was something familiar about the room. Not the furniture, not the books, the feeling. It reminded him of the quiet rooms he had visited throughout the hidden library, places prepared for someone who had not yet arrived. A small table stood beside the window. Upon it rested a cup of tea, still warm. Beside the cup was a second chair. Elias looked toward it. "Someone expected us." Seraphine nodded. Before either of them could sit, the golden thread in Elias's hand moved. It slipped gently across the table, then disappeared beneath an old book. Elias lifted the book. Beneath it was a small wooden drawer. He opened it. Inside rested a single folded letter. This time, there was a name written upon it. Elias looked at the name, and his expression changed. He knew it. It belonged to someone whose journey had touched the library long before his own. Someone whose story had never truly ended. Seraphine came closer. "Do you remember?" Elias nodded. "I remember." He lifted the letter. The moment he touched it, the fire in the hearth brightened. The paper boats above them began to glow, and from somewhere beyond the walls, the sound of many distant bells began to rise. Elias held the letter without opening it. The bells outside continued for a few moments, then slowly faded into silence. He looked toward the dark window. The floating settlement had become almost completely still. Only a few warm windows remained glowing among the clouds. Seraphine sat quietly beside the table. "Are you afraid to read it?" Elias considered the question. "No." He looked down at the letter. "I think I'm afraid of what remembering might change." Seraphine smiled gently. "Then perhaps you already know what the letter is asking." Elias turned the envelope over. There was no seal, no lock, nothing preventing him from opening it. He carefully unfolded the paper. The writing inside was simple. There were only a few lines. A thank you, a farewell, and a wish that someone, someday, would continue the journey. Elias read the words twice. Then he understood. The letter was not asking to be delivered. It had already reached the person it was meant for. It had simply needed someone to remember it. He folded the paper again. The moment he placed it upon the table, the golden thread disappeared. One by one, the paper boats hanging from the ceiling became still. The fire softened, and the second chair beside the table slowly faded into golden light. Elias watched it disappear. He felt no sadness, only gratitude. Somewhere beyond the walls, the floating settlement began to brighten. Morning had not arrived, but the sky was changing. The first hint of dawn touched the far horizon. Seraphine stood. "It is time." Elias nodded. He looked once more at the little house, the warm fire, the paper boats, and the empty chair. Then he stepped outside. The blue door closed gently behind them. Above the clouds, a new path of golden light had appeared, and this time it led downward. The golden path carried Elias and Seraphine away from the floating settlement. Below them, the clouds slowly opened. The hidden houses disappeared behind the mist. The distant lights became smaller until only the stars remained. Elias looked at the golden path beneath his feet. It was leading them back toward the library. Yet something felt different. He was no longer carrying the same questions he had brought into the sky. The letters had taught him that some things were meant to be heard. The lanterns had taught him that some things were meant to be released. And the quiet house had reminded him that remembering someone did not always mean holding them close. Sometimes remembering was simply a way of thanking them for having been part of the journey. Seraphine walked beside him. Neither spoke ahead. The familiar doorway appeared among the clouds. Beyond it waited the hidden library. Elias stepped through first. The golden path disappeared behind them. For a moment, he stood beneath the familiar lanterns of the library. Everything seemed exactly as he had left it. And yet, the blossom lantern at his side was glowing more warmly than before. Elias looked down at it. One new blossom had opened. He smiled. Then he looked toward Seraphine. "Thank you," she smiled softly. "For what?" "For walking with me." She looked toward the endless shelves. "The library brought us together." Elias glanced toward the quiet doorway behind them. Perhaps he took one last breath and allowed the calm of the library to settle around him. Some journeys carried us toward new places. Others carried us back to ourselves. And sometimes, the most important part of a journey was simply knowing when it was time to return. Elias and Seraphine walked together into the warm golden light. Behind them, the doorway slowly closed, and somewhere far above the clouds, one final lantern continued its quiet journey among the stars. The library was quiet when Elias returned. The lanterns above the shelves glowed softly, as though they had been waiting for him. He looked down at the blossom lantern beside him. The new blossom was still open. Its golden light was warmer than the others. Seraphine stood nearby. Neither of them spoke. Then, Somewhere beyond the shelves, a single envelope fell gently to the floor. Elias looked toward the sound. Another envelope followed, then another soon. A narrow trail of letters stretched across the carpet. He walked toward them. None had names written upon them, only destinations: a garden, a river, a tower, a tea house, a station, a place beneath the moon. Elias recognized several of them. They belonged to journeys he had already taken. He picked up one envelope. It was warm, almost as though someone had only just finished writing it. Seraphine looked toward the end of the trail. There, a small door had appeared between two tall shelves. Its surface was covered with hundreds of envelopes. Some were old, some were new, some were sealed with golden wax. Others remained open, waiting. Elias reached for the handle. The door opened. Inside, the room seemed almost endless. Letters covered the walls. Letters rested upon tables. Letters hung from delicate strings beneath the ceiling. Thousands of quiet messages, all waiting to be heard. Elias stepped inside. The blossom lantern brightened. One letter lifted gently from a nearby table and drifted toward him. He caught it. There was a name upon it, not his. He recognized the name immediately. It belonged to someone whose kindness had already changed his journey. Elias held the letter carefully. Some things were never said. Seraphine nodded. Some were. He looked at the countless envelopes, and some are still waiting. They walked deeper into the room. The letters changed as they passed. Some carried apologies. Some carried gratitude. Some held simple words of love. Others contained nothing more than a single sentence. I remember you. Elias stopped. The words seemed to glow softly beneath the paper. He looked around the room. For the first time, he understood why the library had brought him here. The letters were not asking to be delivered. They were asking to be released. A warm breeze moved through the room. Hundreds of envelopes opened at once. No voices came from them, only light, soft golden light, rising gently toward the ceiling. The letters were becoming lanterns. Elias watched them rise. One by one, they disappeared into the darkness above, and somewhere among them, a single blank envelope remained. Elias reached for the blank envelope. It was lighter than the others. There was no name upon it, no destination, no seal, only a faint golden mark in the shape of a crescent moon. He recognized it, the same mark from the tower, the same symbol that had appeared on the wooden box, and beneath the lanterns in the floating pavilion. Seraphine looked at the envelope. This one belongs to you. Elias stared at it. "I have nothing to write." "Perhaps," she said, "that is why it is blank." He turned the envelope over. For a long moment, he simply held it. Then he understood. It did not need a message. It needed a choice. Elias placed the envelope upon the table. The moment he released it, the room became completely still. Every letter stopped moving. Every lantern above them became quiet. Then, the blank envelope opened. A soft golden light rose from inside. It filled the room, passing gently over every table, every shelf, every waiting letter. The unopened messages began to glow. Elias watched as hundreds of envelopes slowly lifted from their places. They drifted upward, not toward the ceiling, but toward the open doorway. The library was releasing them, not into the world, but into the places where their memories belonged. A letter floated past Elias. He saw the name of a traveler he remembered. Another carried the name of someone from the station. Another belonged to a quiet room beneath the rain. Then, one small envelope stopped before him. It carried no name, only 2 words. "Thank you." Elias smiled. He did not open it. He did not need to. He placed his hand gently against its surface, then let it go. The envelope rose. It joined the others and became a small golden light. Seraphine watched the lights disappear. "The room is emptying." Elias looked around. The walls were beginning to change. The thousands of letters faded into soft points of light. The tables disappeared. The strings became silver threads, then vanished. At the far end of the room, another doorway appeared. This one was familiar. It opened toward the main corridor of the hidden library. Elias looked at Seraphine. "Is that the end?" She smiled. "No." She looked toward the glowing doorway. "It is the part where we decide what we carry forward." Elias glanced once more at the empty room. Then he stepped through. The corridor beyond the room felt warmer than before. The shelves seemed closer, the lanterns brighter, the familiar wooden floors softer beneath Elias's steps. He looked back. The doorway to the Room of Unsent Letters was still there, but there were no letters behind it now, only peaceful golden light. Elias turned away. As they walked, small changes appeared along the corridor. A familiar flower rested beside one shelf. A tiny silver bell hung from another. A folded map lay open upon a wooden table. A lantern floated above them. Each belonged to a different journey. Each carried a memory. None asked to be taken. None asked to be forgotten. They simply remained, quietly, where they belonged. Elias smiled. He had spent so long thinking that every journey needed something to be carried home. Now he understood that sometimes a journey was complete precisely because it could be left behind. The blossom lantern beside him glowed softly. Another blossom opened. Seraphine noticed. That makes two. Elias looked at the flowers. What happens when they all open? She smiled. You will know. They continued walking. At the end of the corridor, a familiar golden doorway waited. Beyond it, the night sky could be seen, the same sky they had crossed before. But now, far above the clouds, the lanterns were no longer drifting away. They were becoming stars. Elias stood quietly beneath the doorway. The sight filled him with a peaceful certainty. The journey had not disappeared. It had simply become part of something larger. He looked toward Seraphine. Ready? She nodded. Together, they stepped toward the light. Behind them, the room of unsent letters became still, and every message that had finally found its peace remained safely within the memory of the library. The doorway opened onto a quiet garden beneath the stars. Elias stepped outside. For a moment, he expected another path, another mystery, another distant place waiting to be discovered. Instead, there was only peace. A small garden rested beside the library. Moonlit flowers grew along winding paths. A narrow stream moved gently between smooth stones. And beneath an old tree, a wooden bench waited beneath the branches. Elias sat. Seraphine joined him. Neither felt the need to speak. Above them, the stars moved slowly across the sky. Elias looked at the blossom lantern. 2 blossoms were open now. Their golden light rested softly against the garden. He thought about the journeys behind him, the places he had entered, the people he had met, the things he had learned to keep, and the things he had learned to release. For so long, he had believed that every journey was taking him somewhere farther away. Now, he understood something quieter. Every journey had also been bringing him home. A gentle breeze moved through the garden. One final paper boat appeared upon the stream. Elias watched it drift toward him. Inside rested a small folded note. He opened it. There were only 3 words. Keep walking gently. Elias smiled. He folded the note again, then placed it beneath the blossom lantern. The light grew warmer. Across the garden, the flowers began opening one after another. Not brightly, not all at once, just enough to make the darkness feel welcoming. Seraphine looked toward the library. The door is waiting. Elias stood. He looked back at the garden, at the stream, at the flowers, at the quiet bench beneath the tree. Then he smiled. "Thank you." He did not know who he was thanking. Perhaps the library, perhaps the travelers who had come before him, perhaps every quiet moment that had helped him become who he was. He turned toward the doorway. Seraphine walked beside him. Together, they returned to the hidden library. Inside the library, everything was waiting. The lanterns, the shelves, the quiet rooms, the familiar warmth. Elias walked slowly through the main hall. He noticed something different above the entrance. A new lantern had appeared. It was not hanging from the ceiling. It floated freely above the doorway, softly glowing among the others. Elias looked at it. Seraphine smiled. "That one is yours." He watched the lantern for a long moment. "What does it carry?" She looked toward him. "Whatever you choose." Elias thought about the letters, the floating settlement, the tower, the memories beneath the water, the people and places that had become part of his journey. Then he smiled. "Nothing." Seraphine looked surprised. "Nothing." Not because they meant nothing. He looked at the lantern. "Because I don't need to carry them anymore." The lantern brightened. Its light rose slowly toward the highest shelves. Then it joined the other lights. Elias watched it disappear. The library remained quiet, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt complete. He looked down at the blossom lantern. 2 flowers remained open. The others were still waiting. Elias smiled. There was no need to hurry them. Some things arrived when they were ready. Some journeys ended quietly, and some simply became part of the road ahead. Seraphine turned toward the corridor. "Where will you go next?" Elias looked toward the endless shelves. For the first time, he did not need an answer. He simply knew there would be another door, another morning, another quiet place waiting somewhere within the library. And when the time came, he would walk toward it. Together, they moved deeper into the warm golden light. Behind them, the last traces of the Room of Unsent Letters faded gently into the library. Nothing was lost. Nothing was left waiting, and nothing needed to be held forever. The library had remembered. The letters had been released. The lanterns had found their place, and Elias had learned to keep walking gently. Later, when the library had grown quiet again, Elias returned once more to the main hall. The night outside had become peaceful. Moonlight rested across the wooden floor. The lanterns above him glowed like distant stars. He stood beneath them, listening. Somewhere far away, a piano played a familiar melody. Very softly, Elias smiled. He He recognized it now. The melody was no longer asking him to remember. It was simply reminding him that memory could become peace. He looked toward the shelves. The doorways remained, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, each one leading somewhere, each one holding another story. Yet tonight, Elias did not feel the need to open another. He simply stood there, grateful. The blossom lantern beside him glowed gently. A third blossom began to unfold, slowly, quietly, without being asked. Elias watched it open. Then he closed his eyes. For a few peaceful moments, there was nothing to discover, nothing to solve, nothing to chase, only the soft sound of the library breathing around him. When he opened his eyes again, the third blossom was fully open. Its golden light joined the others. The lanterns above answered. One by one, their lights became warmer, and the hidden library seemed to settle into the deepest silence of the night. Elias smiled. Then he walked toward the place where he had first learned to enter this world, not because he was leaving, not because the journey was over, but because he finally understood that returning was also part of belonging. He paused beneath the doorway. Behind him, the library waited peacefully. Ahead, the night was quiet. Elias took one slow breath, then stepped forward, and somewhere beyond the shelves, another gentle light began to glow. The gentle light remained beyond the shelves. Elias stood quietly beneath the doorway. He watched it for a moment, then understood that he did not need to follow it tonight. Some lights were invitations. Others were simply reminders that there would always be another morning. He turned back toward the library. The lanterns above the hall were glowing softly now. Their light rested across the shelves, across the wooden floors, across every quiet doorway. Elias looked at the blossom lantern beside him. 3 blossoms were open. Their golden light felt warm against his hand. He smiled. There was no rush for the others. They would open when their time came. Seraphine stood beside him. Together, they walked slowly through the main hall. The library seemed almost asleep. A distant clock gave one gentle chime. Somewhere beyond the shelves, water moved softly through an unseen river. Far above, the faint melody of the piano drifted through the quiet. All the places Elias had visited seemed to breathe together, not as separate journeys, but as one long path. He stopped beneath the highest shelves. For a moment, he looked upward. There were still countless stories waiting, countless doors, countless quiet wonders. Elias smiled. Then he continued walking, not because he needed to know what came next, but because he had learned to trust that the next step would appear when it was ready. Behind him, the gentle light faded into the shelves. Ahead, the library opened into another peaceful corridor. Elias and Seraphine disappeared slowly into the warm golden glow, and the hidden library remained awake beneath the stars, quietly holding every memory, every kindness, every journey that had found its way home. The night continued. The lanterns continued glowing, and somewhere beyond the highest shelves, another story was already waiting. And so, another quiet journey inside the hidden library comes to an end. Elias has learned that some memories are meant to be carried, and some are meant to be released with gratitude. But the library is still waiting. There are still doors unopened, quiet places yet to discover, and new journeys waiting somewhere beyond the next shelf. If these peaceful journeys have become a comforting part of your evenings, your gentle support through liking, subscribing, and sharing helps. Keep the hidden library growing and helps Elias continue his journey for every traveler who finds comfort here. Thank you for spending this quiet night with us. Sleep peacefully. Let your thoughts grow still. And when you are ready, we'll meet again inside the hidden library